Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Andre, Calibrite Product Manager at Lumesca. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Ollie Kenchington, cinematographer and colorist, who will demonstrate how the Calibrite ColorChecker video charts can be used to create a faster, more accurate, and more repeatable color workflow for visual podcasts. In a few moments, Ollie will start his presentation, and afterwards there will be a Q&A session. So please stay with us until the end. We've also just kicked off a not unselected video targets. More details on this later. Hope you enjoy the webinar. Let's get started.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining me, especially those of you in the UK or following the England football team. Their World Cup last 32 match has just kicked off at precisely the same time as I've started talking. So if you're here watching me, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hopefully, maybe Audrey can give us some live score updates as we go. So I am here to talk to you about this chap here in its various guises. Doesn't matter whether it's this one. I like this one an awful lot. It's a good size for a lot of the stuff I do. But the Calibrite ColorChecker video chart comes in a little handy passport size. This size, they even do XL and XXL, humongous ones. They all share the common purpose, which is to align your camera to the HD standards that govern all of the video that we output, or the vast majority of it. There are obviously people who are working in HDR. Doesn't apply to what we're talking about today, but even the stuff that is going out for HDR will also be going out as SDR as well. And these charts are an incredibly handy way of essentially aligning your cameras and your output to that standard. Standards are really important in our industry. If you didn't have standards, everything would be all over the place, and anyone who complained about it would just say, well, don't look at me, it's your monitor, or it's your camera, or it's this, or it's that. We need standards. They govern everything that we do, so that when we put stuff out and it meets those standards, if there are any issues, they are very easy to identify. There's a clear traceability of where that problem's been introduced. If someone looks at something that I've put out and says it's really green, I know that because I'm delivering to those set standards, that there must be an issue with their display environment, their viewing environment, and most likely their screen isn't calibrated, or I don't know, maybe they've got their sunglasses on and there's some kind of green tint on the lens and they've forgotten. Who knows? But we can start to immediately look to where the problem is, because we know that we've worked within that standards environment and we've delivered to that standard. So standards are really, really important. And I think in this sort of modern age of content creation, huge explosion in visual podcasting as well, which I'm heavily involved with at the moment. It's easy to kind of forget those standards and forget to kind of align to them, or to be possibly completely unaware of them altogether. Who knows? And I do find, not just slightly common, but the vast majority of questions I get from people who come to me and say, we're really struggling with color, we're really struggling with matching cameras, we're really struggling with getting the quality of our output to look like, X, Y, or Z. It's almost always a fairly obvious thing once you know that they're not adhering to those standards. They're not adhering to them in production, but they're also not adhering to them in post-production. And so there's that kind of, it's almost like free fall, because there's no starting point and there's no finishing point, and there's no sort of taut line between them. Those things are constantly in flux. And if you chase one thing, then something else can change. And it creates a horrible feeling. I remember this feeling well when I first started out 20 years ago, this sort of sense of, what's going wrong? I know something's going wrong. I just don't know where it's going wrong. And it can feel like suddenly your color pipeline is just sort of, out of your control, and you're just sort of fumbling in the dark, and it's a really horrible sensation. What's lovely about these charts is that they're low tech. They do a job, and they do it very well, and there's no ambiguity to it. It's absolutely definitive. You point your camera at this, you do X, Y, Z, and you will hit a certain standard, and that's what everyone should be doing. Now, we're not going to talk too much this afternoon about the complete kind of color pipeline. So I'm not going to get into calibrating monitors, onset monitoring, reference suite, color grading suite monitoring, and those sorts of things. But when you're talking about standards, the whole thing's got to be there, otherwise, it will fall apart. So I'm going to talk to you just about kind of camera calibration, essentially, and aligning multiple cameras, even mixed, manufacturers, different models of cameras in a multicam environment. So I'm kind of deliberately picked a tricky example. I don't think there's not a huge amount of mileage in me sort of sitting here and going, oh, well, you just do this, this, and this, and it works in, perfect studio setting with one camera. So I've deliberately going to show you a complex multi-camera real scenario and how it's used, so you can see, that I'm practicing what I preach, and that this does work. It's not some kind of myth or some kind of special process that you can only get it to work if you do certain things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the in production thing. One of the really lovely things about these charts is it's not just something that you record and take into post. There's a hell of a lot that you can do with it if you do that, and that's a lot of what I'm going to show you this afternoon. But even if you don't do any of that, you can still have a huge impact on the consistency of your output from your cameras by simply using it in production. So by simply getting someone to hold it up in front of the camera, you can immediately start to make use of it there and then in production. So, for example, if I'm showing the color reference and exposure reference side, which is this side, the other side being the white balance side, the main parts, this big area right slap bang in the middle where we've got these 4 large chips, those are our exposure chips, and they're really useful in camera at the point where you're shooting to be able to expose your camera correctly. Now, this in itself can be one of those sort of, when you're starting out, what's exposed? Where do I stop opening my aperture up or closing it down or changing my ISO or whatever it might be? What is exposed? And that complexity often can come from the fact that there's so many things that you can juggle to achieve exposure. There is no one set exposed or not exposed. You can reach an exposed image by bringing up something and offsetting another, by bringing up your lights but turning down your camera sensitivity, or adjusting shutter speed, or whatever it might be. There's all kinds of different scenarios where technically you're exposed that will result in different things. So it can feel very kind of confusing. If you throw into the mix different sensitivities of sensors, different kind of characteristics of different sensors and different cameras, different lenses that are faster or slower and allow more or less light transmission through them, or filtration if you're using it, it can really start to compound and you can get really confused. Even something as simple, I had this one recently where someone was really confused what was going on with their camera, and it turned out they were using an auto cue, and the glass in their auto cue was slightly tinted, and so their exposure was completely wrong from what they thought it was meant to be, and it was underexposed, and they couldn't figure out why, and we eventually got to the bottom of it. Whatever it might be that might be tripping up with exposure, by simply showing the chart to the camera once the camera is set up, you've got your lens of choice on there, your auto cue if you're using it, anything that might be affecting the image down the lens, so filtration and such like. Once that's all set up, if you simply hold this chart in place, you can use these chips, and you can use them in a variety of ways. There's actually several different ways. So one of the ways that I like to do it is I like to go off the top chip. This is a 90% reflective white. So when light hits it, it's reflecting 90% of that light back. That is a really lovely reference because that sort of sits right at the very top of our standard. So this standard I referred to is Rec 709. So it's our broadcast, but video standard that's used for TV. And when you watch something, when you're watching this now, if you're watching this pre-recorded back on YouTube, it's delivered to those Rec 709 standards. And that 90% reflectance is a really useful one because it's pretty much as white as you want things to be in the real world before your camera in SDR starts kind of compressing and trying to shoehorn in all of those kind of super bright whites and specular highlights into that last little horrible bit of Rec 709. So it's a bright diffuse white, like a white fluffy cloud, white piece of paper, that kind of thing. But it's exactly 90% reflectance because it's on this chart, and Calibrite have done a very good job of making sure that every single one of these charts, no matter where you are in the world and wherever you've bought it, it will be exactly 90% reflectance. Now, I find that one quite useful because if I'm, let's for example, using waveform monitoring on my camera or on my external monitor when I'm shooting, I can have that waveform, and it's fairly easy to see because it will be near the top because it's lighter than the rest of the chips, a sort of a flat line that represents it, and I can just open or close down my aperture or adjust my sensitivity of my sensor, or bring up or bring down my lights until that is hitting a specific number. Now, what that number is depends on how you're shooting. So if you're recording into Rec 709, so if you're using a camera and you're shooting directly into Rec 709, then it's fairly straightforward. You can place that right up at the top around sort of 85 or 90 on a waveform monitor. If you don't know what a waveform monitor is and you've never used one, then you might have, say, a histogram on your camera. It depends on how sort of complex your camera is, but a histogram shows black on the left and white on the right. And there's normally numbers, hopefully, along the bottom that show sort of 0 to 100. So you should hopefully see like a little spike. It gets more complicated and more difficult with histograms because it's averaging the whole frame. So it's less easy to go, oh, that's the white 90% reflectance chip. Whereas in a waveform monitor, it flicks the whole thing on its side and it actually plots left to right where it appears in the frame. So you physically can see it moving and it's obvious what the thing that you're trying to find out the value for is. But they're both tools that help you sort of perceive the luminance spread within your image. You can't just eyeball this. If you're sat there right now thinking, well, my camera doesn't have those tools, I have no way of externally monitoring with those tools, all I can do is just look at my screen. Unfortunately, there's no point in you listening because that sort of eyeball hope it works is kind of where everyone starts. As you start to progress and get more professional, you get sort of cameras that have more advanced tools to help you check exposure, from beyond histograms to waveform monitors to zebras to false color. There are a myriad of ways that you can check this. And if your camera doesn't have that, or you don't have an external monitor that allows you to do that, then there's actually no way for you to check anyway. So therefore, you're not going to be using a chart in production, at least, to help you because you haven't got those tools. But if you have those tools, then you can place them where you want them. So with a waveform monitor, I can place that up at sort of 85, 90. You'll hear me sort of say vague numbers. There's two reasons for that. One is every single scene is different. So for example, where I am right now, if I calibrated based on what I've got here, you can see it's happening anyway with my camera. It's clipped outside. I've got brightness in my frame which exceeds 90% reflectance. It in fact exceeds the upper limits of Rec 709, and therefore there's no way I'm going to recover that. Even if the bulk of my image adheres to that's still going to be clipped. That's fine. I don't care about my outside being clipped right now. Oh look, there you go. I've given my camera automatically applies those little animated on-screen effects. Apologies. Then I don't really care about what's going on out there, but my subject, me in this case, is being illuminated, and I can check it on there. The other way that I can do this, so if this top one's sort of placed around 85, 90 in Rec 709, this next one down is a middle grey. You may have heard of middle grey. crosses over into photography as well. Absolutely universal way of measuring sort of mid tones and where your subject would normally live. So middle grey, 18% reflectance, absolutely standardized across the whole industry, always the same on every single Calibrite chart. And that one, again in Rec 709, should fall somewhere around 45 IRE or 45%. So that white one, we're up at the top, sort of 85, 90, somewhere around there, out of 100 on a percentage or an IRE scale. That middle grey, we're somewhere around that sort of 45. Now, each camera is going to place those in slightly different places, but if your camera is shooting straight into Rec 709, they're going to be pretty close to those numbers because you're already shooting into that standard, and that's kind of set. But the response of the sensor might slightly shift things around. What's really good is that you can actually go to your camera manufacturer's website. You can download a white paper, and it will tell you two numbers. It will tell you where it exposes 90% reflectivity and where it exposes 18% reflectivity for a given gamma profile, a given image profile for the camera. So if you have a Sony, you can go to Sony's website, you can get the white paper for their particular model, and it'll tell you where it exposes those. But they're all going to be pretty much around that sort of 85, 90, sort of 45, 50, maybe slightly below 45, maybe slightly above 45. Those are your standards. Where things get more complex, not massively so don't panic, but more complex, is where you shift from recording in camera in a standardized profile, a Rec 709 standard profile, to a log profile, because those log profiles, there is no standard. Each manufacturer has a completely different one, and they behave slightly differently. They're optimized for different sensors, and the engineers that made them, what they feel is the best that they can get from that sensor. Log profiles exist to rinse the maximum amount of dynamic range out of the sensor for a given camera. And because sensors are different for different cameras, manufacturers and their engineers have tweaked those log gamma curves, accordingly. And some camera manufacturers will change them for different sensors. So you might have a new camera come out that's got a different gamma curve that's specific to that that device. For example, Apple introduced log recording capabilities in their iPhone 16, I think it was. It may have been the 15. It was the 15. And then in the iPhone 16, the sensor had a capability of recording more dynamic range. They introduced an Apple Log 2. So there's a whole new log gamma curve they introduced for a new sensor, had different responsiveness, different dynamic range. Because that varies and it isn't a standard, that's where it's really important to go to the camera manufacturer's website and check those numbers. And again, they normally show you in a chart alongside the Rec 709 values, these two values, your 90% and your 18%. What are they in Rec 709? Fine, I've told you 85, 90 or 45-ish. But more importantly, they'll then tell you where do they go when you're in their S-log2, S-log3, C-log2, C-log3, D-log, V-log, all of the logs, Apple log 2, whatever it might be, it will tell you where they go because those gamma curves will plot them differently. So if I'm pointing this at my camera and I'm actually not in Rec 709, but my camera's recording in, I'm going to give you an example that's relevant to me. I shoot on the Canon C80 most often, shoot into Canon C-log 2. If I'm holding up that chart and I'm recording into C-log2, I know actually that 90% reflective chip at the top drops down to 60. So it drops down to 60 IRE. And in fact, actually most of the common sort of large dynamic range log curves, so S-log3 would be the same. Most of them end up placing that 90% reflectance chip down at around about 60 IRE. The middle grey one will drop further as well. It will drop down, so it'll end up somewhere around 30, 32, 33, maybe a little bit higher. If you go to the camera manufacturer's website, you can find the precise values. And if you're into precision, like I am, then it's great because you can actually place these exactly where they should be based on that gamma curve. And you're essentially exposing your camera 100% based on what you should be exposing it for. If you do that with all of the cameras, so for example, there's a podcast that I'm a DOP on at the moment, 3 cameras, my C80, and at the most recent episode, we had 2 FX6s. you know, two S-Log3 cameras and one C-Log2 camera. If you know what they are for different camera manufacturers and you know the different values they drop to, then you can simply point the cameras at these charts and you can expose them there and then on set or on location based exactly on where you know that they should be. I know that the new ARRI, a couple of years ago now, but the ARRI 35 places middle grey quite low. It's like 27 or something, ARRI. So you can learn what they are. You know, it's a great party trick. You can just tell your mates exactly where to expose middle grey or 90% reflectance for every given camera. Now, the next one down is a 20%. Well, I don't know what the reflectivity is. Calibrite don't say specifically. I know the reflectivities of these because they're standards. This one is just a dark grey, and it tends to sit around about 20 IRE once you're in a Rec 709 working color space on your computer. And then this last one is actually, you can see it reflecting. It's a glossy black. The idea is if you tilt it just right, like that, you get a nice deep as close to zero as possible. Trying to record zero from something reflecting light is, you know, not easy. They've done their best here with this glossy one. I would say this is the one that's the one you should be least slavishly kind of trying to place, and I'll show you this in an example in a minute. Go more on how the overall image looks, but it's going to be somewhere near zero. Realistically, it tends to end up around sort of 5 to 10, you know, depending on your image. So let me show you how to use those chips. Obviously in camera, you can just adjust your camera, but in post, if you've hit record and capture this, you can then bring that into post. Now, where that's really useful is if you've got multiple cameras and they're all using different log curves, you can expose them based on the manufacturer's details. But then you can also use these 7 different tonal graduated chips to see where each one different one lands. And because all of the cameras are looking at the same chart at the same time, you'll be able to see very clearly the differences and adjust them just using a simple curve so that they're all actually sort of their contrast, their tonal range matches up precisely between them all. And that's really what this talk is about today, is about when you've got different cameras, how you can match them up and what you're doing with them. I'll also, just because it's more interesting than staring at me, I'll also move straight directly onto using the color chips as well. So these chromaticity references, they're the Rec 709 primaries and secondaries for the standard. And again, they should be in exactly the same place on all cameras when you're outputting. It's basically on the front here, we've got luminance standards and color standards, and we can adhere to them. So I'll show you that now. One last thing quickly. Let's not forget the back of this one. We have the white balance side. It's completely spectrally flat. There's no pigments in it whatsoever. When light hits it, there's no pigments in the surface, so no frequencies get absorbed. So everything that's reflected back is exactly what hit it. It's a perfect surface for then white balancing your camera from, because you know the light that's bouncing off it in your scene is exactly what your camera is then referencing as its white points. You should always white balance your camera based on a proper white balance chart like this. And if you expose your camera using these big chips and then white balance your camera using this in camera at the time where you're shooting it, and then record both sides, you get a second opportunity to tweak if maybe the light changes slightly after you hit record, or, you know, who knows, something may happen, but you can kind of align as closely as possible to the standards using the chart in production. Potentially that's as far as you go. Fine, no problem. But I'm now going to show you what happens if you actually record those charts and take those clips with you into post-production. Now, I'm going to be using DaVinci Resolve. I actually, you know, this isn't, you know, some kind of sales pitch for using a particular piece of software. It doesn't really matter what software you use. I'm just very familiar with doing this process in DaVinci Resolve. I also use Final Cut Pro. I tend not to use Premiere very much. But if you're sat there thinking, well, I don't use Resolve, you will find the tools I'm using exist in the software that you use almost certainly. So the process is the same. I'm just using a slightly different piece of software. So let me share my screen. Let's go with this side, and hopefully you can now see everything. So just to start with, I've actually just got a very a straightforward clip here. This is from a sort of like a piece to camera with a presenter, and she's just showing the camera the chart. I've got that frame lined up. You only need one frame. So if someone only briefly, shows it and spins it around or whatever, it doesn't matter. You only need one little glimpse of it. It does raise the question, when is it in the right place? So this I have found is, from experience, changes from scene to scene. Always try and do what she's doing here, which is to align the chart directly to the camera. So you're holding it up at the face. Let me go across to the color page here and just go full screen. So she's aligning it directly to the camera, and it's in front of her face. The talent's face is always the most important thing. Light will fall off differently and land in different places at different times and different intensities. We want to rule out anything, measuring anything that's not the most important thing. So it's up by her face. I haven't done this, I've had people like, oh, I didn't want to disturb them, so I just did it on myself off to one side. It needs to be done where the talent is, where their face is, to get the most accurate recording that you can. So it's oriented and facing directly to the camera. Now that sometimes doesn't give you the best result. Sometimes, and I tend to find it's in environments where you've got higher dynamic range. So this scene here, there's nothing above 10 stops, let's say. Her shirt's probably the most reflective thing, other than the 90% reflectance chip that we can see right now. And so I haven't had to worry too much about the dynamic range of the scene. If you do have a very dynamic scene, you might need to orient the chart just slightly more and favor it more towards your main key light source, just so that you don't end up with an image that's too dark. I'm going to show you a far more complex and real world example in a minute where exactly that was happening. So if you don't know what I mean, you'll see it firsthand in a second. Let me just quickly, can you use the ColorChecker Passport? Hang on, I'm going to just answer this question. So can you use the ColorChecker Passport for photography, which you already own, for video use, or does it need to be the specific one for video? That's a very good question. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to show you, I'm going to illustrate my answer here. Let me just stop screen sharing. Let me show you. So the very short answer is no, you can't use your one for photography. Let me show you why. So Calibrite are aware of this, and because they're aware of this, they recently-ish, maybe a year or two ago, I've kind of, you get to my age and it all blurs into one. I can't remember, Andre will correct me. But a year or two ago, I think, Calibrite introduced a new version of the ColorChecker Passport that has both. So you have the video chart and the photography chart on both, and they did that specifically because, well, first of all, a lot of people are hybrid shooters now, and they're doing both. But the fact that they've done that answers your question. No, you can't use that one for video. That's why they now have on them both. And the reason is actually is fairly clear once you look at them. If you look at the color references along the video side, they are completely different to the primary and secondary references for photography. And that's because they are two different color environments. With photography, you're working in sRGB or Adobe RGB. You're working in a print, subtractive color model, ultimately, if you're printing. With video, it's a purely additive color model. Sorry, they make a hell of a noise when you close this. There we go, let's put that down. It's a completely different color model, and the Rec 709 primary and secondaries are not the same as you'd have in sRGB for stills. So if you use the photography chart for what I'm about to show you, you will end up with the wrong results. They will not line up at all. So the only time, and this is a very specific use case, but the only time where it's okay to use those photography charts in a video environment is if you're on a big project where there's VFX and they're using reflective balls and chart references for visual effects. Those, they use onset stills for those, and they actually go through to VFX as image-based, frame-based still files. and they do get converted into a video color working space later on. So that is okay to use those ones in that situation. But if you're just shooting video and you're a content creator delivering online, don't use the photography one. Make sure you use the Calibrite ColorChecker video. That's why they introduced it. Let me go back to sharing my screen and let's carry on. Sorry, I'm talking fast, but I've got a hell of a lot to get through, so apologies. I hope I answered your question, Louis. So with this side here, you can see this is in log. This whole image is clearly very loggy, very grey. From a color management point of view, the first thing I'm going to do is just going to convert this into a color environment where I can start working on it. So this is a little bit adjacent to what we're doing. I have to do this in order to show you what I'm doing. If you're using Premiere or Final Cut Pro, all this color management stuff is basically under the hood and being done for you by default. You can set up Resolve so it does that for you by default as well, but often we're manually taking control of that. So if what I'm about to do is a bit confusing to you, or you don't use Resolve, just sort of stick your fingers in your ears and go la 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 for a minute. If it's of interest to you, then you'll see what I'm doing. So I'm actually going to convert this video quickly from the camera's color gamut, which was Canon Cinema Gamut, to and it was Canon Log 2. And I could just use my timeline setting. This is now essentially straight into Rec 709. If you'll see a slightly different color management setup when I show you a real example of an actual project in a minute. But the only difference is I convert it from the camera's source gamut and gamma into a unified working space, which is the Blackmagic DaVinci wide gamut and DaVinci intermediate gamma. And then I have a separate color space transform, then taking everything and moving that into Rec 709 at the end. The reason I do that is because on the example I'm going to show you in a minute, is they're different cameras. So you've got Sony's S Gamut 3 and Canon's Cinema Gamut, different gamuts. By putting them into a unified, much bigger gamut, it means that they're sort of not losing any information when I'm working on them. But suffice to say, for now, I'm simply just moving this from Canon Log 2 to Rec 709. I could also achieve that if I was in Premiere or Final Cut and I wanted to do the same thing. Sometimes they automatically do it, and they can Final Cut will automatically guess from the metadata what you've got. But if you don't have that happening, you can always just apply the LUT. So, for example, I've got here a Cinema Gamut Canon Log 2 to Canon 709. So I could always just chuck a LUT that I've got from the Canon website on. It would do the same thing, but I'm just going to use a color space transform for now.
Please, sorry for interrupting. Could you reshare your screen, please?
Could I reshare my screen? Is it not doing it? That's weird. I did click on it.
Yep, perfect, thank you.
Did it drop out, or did I just never click it properly in the first place?
You clicked it and then it dropped out.
Okay, fine. Okay.
A minute ago, but it's all good. Thanks.
So all I've done, I thought you were watching, I should have kept track on what was going on over here. Sorry, guys. All I've done is I've just added this one node, and I've just put a color space transform on, going from Canon Cinema Gamut, Canon Log 2 to my working timeline space, which is Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. So I'm essentially now in that standardized environment that I was talking about before. So that's kind of got me the first step. And actually, I'm just going to label this node as my color space transform. And then I'm going to add a new node, and this is going to be for my contrast. You always start with contrast first when you're color grading. Much more sensitive contrast. It's a much bigger and more important thing to do first. And if you're working in a program that isn't YRGB like Resolve, then it also makes more sense to work with contrast first, because it will have a knock-on impact on your red, green, blue channels anyway. So there's no point doing color work first. I'm going to go to my waveform monitor. All of the post-production tools for video have waveform monitors in them. If you've never seen one before, let me show you it. In fact, this is an overlay waveform. I'm just going to show you a Luma only, nice and basic. There we go. And you can actually already see, look, we've got line, 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 and line. And those are our 4 lines in the image. As she moves, you can see them moving. Okay, that's the benefit, one of the huge benefits of a waveform monitor over a histogram. So we can see already whereabouts it is. I'll just shrink that down. And I can just use a simple contrast curve if I want to, but I want to place these where I gave you the numbers for Rec 709. So I want that top one, for example, let me just bring this all the way up to sort of around about 85, 90, somewhere around about there. So all I've done is that. Oh, it's dropped out again. And I think I now know why it's dropped out. So it's when I go full screen in DaVinci Resolve. So don't go full screen in DaVinci Resolve again, Ollie. Sorry about that. You're just going to get stuck. Let me close the clips. Hopefully this is big enough for you to see. But all I'm doing is I've just pulled that up. You can see instantly this now looks more contrasty, far closer to the real world. So if we turn both these off, there's our log image. There's our conversion from Canon C-Log 2 to Rec 709. And then all I've done is just simply pull the white point. So I've placed the white one. By pulling that up and pulling my curve across, I'm already bringing up the rest of the image. I could have also done that using my gain. So if I go to my gain control here, it's pretty much going to do the same thing. So there's a number of different ways you can do it. These might be labeled as highlights, so shadows, midtones, and highlights in software you might be using, but I'm using these exposure controls. I'm using the most kind of common ones as possible, so hopefully you'll have something similar. And we can see that that's come up there. Now, I'm actually going to go back and do this in my curves, give me a little bit more granular control. We're up at that sort of 85, 90 kind of point there. And if we look to the next one down, here's my middle gray. And my middle gray is currently sitting at around about sort of 37, 38. So remember, it should be about 45 or so. So I'm just going to add a control point just a little bit lower and just bring that up a touch. Let's try and get that closer to 45. Bring this down a little bit. And then my 20 IRE, my dark gray is actually pretty much that exactly where it should be. It's maybe a touch under. Let's just bring it up a little bit. And then my glossy black is kind of sitting around about 5 or so. Now, based on her black jacket and what I know of the scene when I was there, I can tell that actually I don't want to bring those blacks down anymore. If I put that black reference, let me make this bigger so you can see, if I put that black glossy reference there, right down at 0, I just know that all this other information would start to get crushed out. And it's on the cusp of it as it is. So let's not do that. So when we talk about, hang on, has my keyboard stopped working? That's a bit weird. Only seems to have stopped working inside Resolve. That's weird. Okay, that might need to do a reset in a second, sorry. But that is my contrast. So I've had to do an awful lot of work, and that's because I didn't expose it properly at the time. In fact, what happened was I exposed it, and it was one of those days where the sun was in and out of clouds, and when I exposed the camera, the sun was out, and this was much brighter. But actually, by the time she started her piece to camera, the sun had gone, and it was much duller. So that's why I'm making such a huge change to go from where I've exposed it in camera to actually where it should be. But assuming you've got a good, healthy, robust codec, 10-bit ideally or more, not too compressed. Although actually this is H.265, this codec that I've been using. It's Canon's XF-HEVC codec. But it is 10-bit. There's plenty of information there. The image isn't falling to pieces, and I've made actually quite a dramatic change. Let's move on. If I was doing multi-camera matching, I could then compare other cameras and where they're plotting. Well, do this work first, like I've just done, but then compare how you're getting step by step from black to white, because each different gamma curve is going to do that in a very slightly different way. And so I can use that to not just pin 3 references, but actually 7 references. which gives me more granularity and more fine control. And I can do that in my curves as well. In fact, one of the things I would do in here is I would apply my default anchors. There we go. And that actually splits the image up into 20% chunks. So I can target more specifically those different areas of the image. But I'm going to add a new node, and I'm going to call this one color. So I've done my contrast work here, and I'm going to do my color work. I'm going to flick across to my vector scope. I need to make sure that my 2x zoom is on. Don't need my skin tone indicator, but kind of useful. But I do need my 2x zoom on here, so that these boxes here, let me turn it off, these boxes here more closely line up with where they should be for that Rec 709 control. So if I now look at these boxes here, they are appearing, let me make this bigger, they are appearing, although faintly, on these axes here in my vector scope. And you can see that they're kind of pointing at or close to these boxes, and that's because they're meant to. The better your camera points at these boxes without doing any of the following work I'm about to do, the more accurate your camera is out of the box at capturing a Rec 709 standard. That's why I shoot with Canon personally. They're very close to these standards straight out the box. As long as you white balance your camera, you should be pretty much there. Every camera is weakest along its green magenta axis just because of the nature of a Bayer pattern sensor. So those are normally the ones, one or other or both, that need the most work. And then you'll normally find yellow and red are the most accurate because most camera manufacturers will prioritize those because, of course, between the two of them is where flesh tone lives. Andre?
Ollie, we're not seeing the floating scopes for some reason, yeah.
Because I shared my window rather than my whole screen. Let me do that again. Share screen this time. Share entire screen. Oh, Resolve has just bummed out entirely. Let me relaunch that. Fun, fun, fun.
All good fun, yeah.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
You can see it now. Apologies. Sorry. It's so many different facets to see what's going on. So we can see my color node here. I haven't done anything yet. To actually make it easier to see these lines, I'm actually going to just isolate them quickly. So I'm just going to draw a mask around them. You can do this in any other software as well. Just draw a quick mask around. In Final Cut Pro, it's a little bit annoying. You have to create the mask, and then you have to switch to outside mode, and then just drop the saturation and the luminance all the way down, and then it makes essentially everything outside of the mask selection black, which achieves the same thing as in Resolve when we click our highlight mode. Just essentially makes everything gray. In Final Cut, it would make everything black by changing the outside to desaturated and dark. Again, let's just make this a bit bigger, and I'm going to increase the brightness of my traces, maybe turn down the other ones so it's a bit more obvious, and hopefully you can see those lines. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my curves. Again, I know these tools are in Premiere and Final Cut. I'm sure they're in others as well. One of the nice things in Resolve is you've got these little preset tabs and a little cheat. If you click red and cyan, it automatically adds the control points for all of the rest of them. And each one of these will line up with the primary and secondary adjustments that you're about to do. So we're going to do two adjustments. We're going to do saturation and hue. So hue versus hue and hue versus sat. The hue versus hue is going to adjust the angle. So it's going to change the angle like a clock face around, which is of the two the more important one, because as the hue angle changes, the appearance of those colors changes. And then the hue versus sat is going to be how far out they're falling. So for example, I can see that red is already overshot. I can see magenta, blue, cyan and green haven't gone far enough. So that's what I'll adjust with hue versus sat. Let's go with hue versus hue. And if I get this up, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do this from my control surface. If you have a control surface, this is super, super easy. So I'm just going to adjust the angles for each of these, and I'm doing it. There you go. I've got barely any work to do. You can see magenta was the biggest adjustment, 6.51. And then there's barely anything on the others. And then if I go to my hue versus sat, I'm just going to go in through. So let's pull red back, a bit more yellow. Now I've put a bit more yellow in, I can see that the angle is very slightly out. So I can just tweak that back a touch, depending on how fussy you want to be about it. Green, in the box you go, slightly tweak the angle. Cyan, in you go, slightly tweak the angle, maybe back off the sat just a touch. Blue, bosh, and then magenta, bosh. So you can see they're all in those boxes now. If I turn off my highlight mode, obviously the changes are only within the masked area, so I need to turn my mask off to apply it to the rest of the image. And now, not a huge amount is going to change. If you look at my vector scope, actually, there's quite a lot of movement. Can you see how we've gone from that to that? But the key components, my skin tones changed a little bit. If I move the chart out of the way and I turn it on and off, you can see her skin tones were a bit too red. That's mostly where I've brought the saturation back from the red. I've noticed with the Canons, they tend to slightly overcook the red channel. And you often end up having to scale it back a little bit. And Sony's do something similar as well. So the work I've just done in here has actually given a far more accurate representation of her skin. Now, I haven't touched her skin, but what I've done is I've aligned the chart that was directly in front of her face to the Rec 709 standard, and then once the chart vamooses, we're left with a perfectly accurate image. So what I've done is I've essentially gone from this to this. So this is the Rec 709. So I've shot log, converted to Rec 709 through a color space transform, or it could be through a LUT. And then a lot of people would then stop there and start going, oh, it's too dark and fussing. But with the chart, I've got it precisely where it needs to be based off it looking correct there. So those two nodes are fixing my exposure and also ironing out any slight discrepancy with my color balance. Now, I also got her to flip over and I could record the white balance side, just to show you if I thought that the white balance was out for any reason, though it shouldn't be because I white balanced in camera just before I hit record, then I would find that out here. Again, I'll just draw a quick window just to isolate that part of the chart. Have a look in here. What do we see? We see a big fat blob right slap bang in the middle, which is where white, grey and black should be. In other words, there's no color bias going on here. If I'm really fussy and I zoom right in, it's a little bit shuffling up this way, but as it's shuffling up the flesh tone line, I don't really care. That will actually just be where the sun came out. It got a little bit warmer than it was at the point where I white balanced the camera. I'm not going to stress out too much about that for a short piece to camera like this. So essentially that's my work done in terms of prepping the image. And then anything I do beyond that, and I may well do nothing. In fact, I probably wouldn't do anything for this, but anything I did do beyond that would be purely based on, simply my taste. I might, for example, go and add a little bit more saturation into the image, make it a little punchier, possibly push up the greens a touch just to kind of make that bush behind her just stand out a little bit more. But I'm not doing anything particularly dramatic, just a little bit more saturation in certain parts of the image. And it looks brilliant. So let's look at a more complex example. This was a single camera, nice and straightforward. I'm going to switch over to a real project. So let's go into my charts here. So this is a, where's my timeline gone? This is a project. So I'm DOP on a visual podcast called Roots, which is the RHS's visual podcast. It launched earlier this year. This is the 8th episode, hosted by the lovely Jo Wiley. This episode we have social media influencer and crazy gardener who loves to jump around his garden, slapping bags of compost and jumping on his roof, and an incredibly thoroughly nice guy as well, called Johnny Hinks. So there I am. Look, it proves I was there, holding the chart and getting, that's my camera that I've left unmanned hence my quizzical, am I holding this in the right place? I'm in between the two of them. I'm pointing it towards my camera. I'm pointing it towards the other camera, and I'm pointing it towards the A camera. So we've got A, wide shot, B, Joe single. Sorry, no, A, wide shot, B, guest single, that's my angle, and then C, which is Joe's single. These two, these two FX6s, Sony FX6. It's a mixed camera setup, makes the chart even more important, showing the white balance side and the chart side. And then this is my C80, Canon C80. Okay, now I've already done this work, so but I'm just doing this to show you that it's real and it happens. So here's my let's go back here. Here's my contrast node. In fact, let's turn them all off, and then we can go through it piece by piece. Let's start off with our contrast. Go to the waveform. So that's where we start. That's where we end up. Just slightly brighter. I actually on this show I don't expose the cameras using the chart because it would be too slow with the multicam workflow on this particular show, where we have 15 minutes to get in, get set up and start recording. So, and we're in the guest's garden. So this is not somewhere you want to be faffing around too much. It's super quick turnaround. So actually I only briefly check my exposure with the chart. But rather than doing that on each of the three cameras, I use a light meter just to quickly check that, to read those numbers out to the rest of the crew. So the disparity there is just simply based on the diffuse dome on the light reading from my particular angle, and it's only small, nowhere near as bad as the last example. We were fairly lucky; it was completely blue sky. Well, I wasn't that lucky. It was 38 degrees C. It was absolutely roasting, but it was completely blue sky. So we had no worry of the light dipping in and out too much. There was a little bit of kind of contrail and some sort of light cloud at times, but it wasn't too different. So I've simply done the same process, isolated and matched that. I've then gone to my other angles. Let's turn these off as well, so you can see the process. There's my contrast adjustment there. So what you're seeing there is straight out of camera. Maybe I should show that first. Let's turn these all off, just so you can see that it's not all fun and games. So this is the raw output. This has been converted from the log. I'm using, in this particular example, I'm using Resolve's color management. So I'm using the DaVinci RGB color managed at the timeline level. So that's essentially doing the same job as the color space transform I was using in that last example. So that's why it's already not log. So we've gone from log to Rec 709. That's what the C80 looked like. That's what one of the FX6s looked like. That's what the other FX6 looked like. Okay, so that's what we've got coming out of camera. Not the best, I think you'll agree. Particularly those two FX6s don't match very well. That's just differences in angle of incident light reflecting and changes to camera operating settings. And this Canon colors look quite different. You can see they're more saturated. This is Sony S-Gamut 3. We initially did S-Gamut 3 Cine, which is what a lot of people recommend, but we found that it was, actually much easier to shoot into S-Gamut 3 because it's a similar size gamut to Canon's Cinema Gamut, which is to say much bigger. And actually, we've had much easier time of it color grading these to match since. So contrast based on the chart, contrast based on the chart, big difference, and contrast based on the chart. Okay, that's what we've done first of all. Then I followed up. Let's go back. I've then followed up, as I showed you, with my hue versus hue and hue versus sat. There are those adjustments. Okay, so if we turn that off and on, let's go to the vector scope so you can see this. Before, after, before and after. Okay, if we go to our, sorry, the reason why that doesn't line up, by the way, just in case. So you'll see that that is far exceeding those points that I talked about before. That's because there's a lot of extra work going on in other levels of this. So you'll see in the other sequence I've got additional nodes then making subsequent changes, which are then more about the look and the feel of the show. So there is a much more saturated show than typically do. So we're aligning to these first, and then there are adjustments happening afterwards. So that's my camera aligned. There is, there we go, there is that FX6 aligned. You'll see the color of the skin changing, and that one as well, which again, let's make this bigger. We can see shifting quite a bit, particularly those brings those reds around, and the greens are always really different with the Sonys. Look at the difference when I turn that on and off. Look at the grass. It's a much warmer yellowy grass once it's done. And then as a final step, I've just triple checked the white balance, which has just made, actually it makes very little difference. You can just see a very subtle shift with these cameras. Interestingly, these two going in a similar direction, but opposites, and this one going in a different axis. So again, this is why it's so useful to capture these charts, because we white balanced all the cameras to be the same. But again, using a color meter because we didn't have time to on location to do it. But by recording the chart, we then get another chance to actually go, oh, there are slight differences because they're all seeing the same reference. We can change that. Let me quickly, as a last step, just going to show you the final sequence. So we've got the intro, we've got some B-roll, and then here are the final clips as they cut. And as we cut from wide, you'll see Johnny, his top's the same, his skin's the same, the foliage is the same. As we cut from that Canon to that FX6, again, colors are the same, skin's the same, and there's complete consistency as we go through it. Now, if you look at each shot, you'll see actually on these ones, all I've done for this shot beyond the chart balance is I've just done a little bit of work on Johnny's skin tones. It was so hot that his skin was reading quite pink. There was quite a lot of, because the blood comes to the surface when you're hot, when you're sweating. So I've just done him a bit of a favor here, and I've just brought his skin tone just round a bit so it's less pink on that. That's all I've done. So that's the only thing I've done beyond that at the clip level. And then on this one, I've got a node to match it more closely to A and skin, and then there was an issue with the blue of Joe's top. Now, some of these issues you can't avoid, even though we've aligned it with the chart. It is still an object that light is reflecting from, and objects appear differently depending on how light hits them. And you see this all the time, even with two identical cameras. These two are identical cameras, identical sensors. They looked probably more different actually than my camera, the Canon, and that's just because of the completely different angle that light's bouncing off the subject and bouncing into the light. Into the camera, so it makes a big difference. The lens characteristics will make a big difference as well, or any filtration you've got. So don't expect to necessarily be identical just because you've got the same model of camera. But where we've used the charts, it's aligned them really closely, and then the rest of it is actually, so when I say, for example, match A, well, I've already matched them with the charts. What I'm matching with this, if I just turn this on and off, is I'm actually just changing the way that the gamma curve was just slightly overcooking some of these highlights. Now that, as I say, is just the characteristics of the image, and also the perception, because your eyes work a certain way as well. So even if something technically is reflecting the same amount of light, when you look at it from a certain angle, it might appear differently. So a lot of what we do in color grading actually is this back and forth, back and forth. I know technically it's the same, but do I have to change it slightly to account for the way my vision works? In fact, I've done a number of changes here. If we go to our post change, you can see I've slightly changed the color of Johnny's shirt, not because it was wrong, but our eye perceived it differently when it's surrounded by that dark blue fence in the background. And in fact, the fence in the background was reading not green enough compared to the others. So there's a lot of additional work that goes on, but at the heart of it, and where it all starts, And I can show you that for each clip now. Where it starts is color space transform, bringing me from, so let's go, let's turn these all off. So color space transform to bring this into the Sony world. We've got our contrast adjustment, we've got our hue versus hue, we've got our little white balance tweak, and then this was just a perceptually, this angle was picking up a bit more yellow than I wanted. So that's where a lot of the work's going on, leaving actually the clip level not to do very much at all. But it all begins with those chart adjustments, which I've copied across. So the person who edits this sends me across these chart clips immediately after we've shot it. He then starts editing, and about a week later, I then get the actual final edit where I just copy across those changes and then add on any of the additional grading work I need to do to make it look as awesome as it does. 6 o'clock on the dot. Let's stop showing that. There's been no more questions coming up whilst I was talking, which is why I pushed it the wire, Andre. I saw no, other than Louis' question earlier, I didn't see anything else pop in, so I thought I'll use up every last second.
Well, that was very informative. Thanks, Ollie. A lot of good tips. We have been getting some questions. I'll be putting them into the Q&A.
They've been coming through the chat, have they?
Yes, so let's... Okay, there was a question about auto cue, so I've already responded to that. It's the teleprompter that scrolls the text over your lens. Can you use ColorChecker Passport? So you've already answered the question about the ColorChecker Passport photo. So just to clarify, the current version of the hybrid target that combines the photo target with the video target is the Passport Video 2. So that's the one Ollie you were showing. So this is the question I'm going to repost into Q&A.
Someone's made the point, just whilst you're looking at that, Andre, someone's made the point, which I completely agree with. Marco has mentioned that it's much harder to see the chips on the Passport ones.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is why this is the one I use most often. The Passport ones I hang on to for like tabletop stuff, product work, bits and pieces like that. I wouldn't use it for anything where you've got people. In fact, on podcasts, I've got the XL one, the huge one, and that's particularly good for podcasting because you're like up to sort of 4 or 5 meters away. The bigger the better. Makes it much easier to see in your scopes.
So Douglas has a question about HLG recording. So I would like to know who HLG recording and deliverables changed the project.
I would like to know who or how. I guess you mean
HLG,
which changed the project. Well, it's HDR, so it changes it quite considerably. The HDR is quite a big separate diversion from this. HLG is easier than Dolby with Dolby Vision because it is at least a scene referred HDR, and it's scalable automatically. So a lot of what I said would still apply, but obviously you're opening up additional latitude above your 90% reflectance. It doesn't make a huge difference because a bit like I was talking about at the start where I said, oh, look, this works for me here, but there was clipping outside the window. That doesn't really change. You're still going to prioritize your subject and put the chart where your subject is, but you just know because you're in an HDR deliverable and you need to be working in that color space, you've got that range for the luminance to fall into, which you obviously don't have in SDR, so it gets clamped. So it kind of doesn't change it, but it also sort of does change it because a lot of what I said you would ignore because you've got the extra space there in the first place.
Thank you. So then we have a question about the ColorChecker video. So Nabil's question, so can you use the reflective white for photography? So you could.
Not really. The luminance, the luminance available to you in stills is much greater than video. In video, we've got a much reduced sort of luma envelope that we deliver to. In fact, when I'm color grading one client where I do a lot of product stuff, they always do stills and video at the same time, and they always deliver the stills to the client first, and then they send the approved stills to me to grade to match. And it's an absolute nightmare because all the client kind of has now become accustomed to is a very high contrast still image with the latitude that comes from a still image file. And then there's me trying to, I can't hit super whites in my video. So I'm trying to deliver something that's Rec 7 and 9 for social, and they're sort of looking at the two going, oh, it doesn't look bright enough. So no, you can't. It doesn't align, unfortunately. Someone about using Final Cut Pro, what's the best way to follow through compared to DaVinci? I use Final Cut Pro a lot. You've got hue versus hue, hue versus sat. You've got the same scopes. In fact, it's much easier to do what I've just done in Final Cut Pro than it is in Premiere. Premiere's scopes are just nowhere near as detailed. It's much harder to see what you're doing. So Louis, who was asking about Final Cut Pro, I've done it in that plenty of times too. It's a little bit more faff. The masking I mentioned is a bit more tricky. So that highlight mode you don't have, so you have to draw a mask and then change to controlling the outside the mask and turn the saturation and brightness down to hide it from the scopes, which is a bit of a sort of a workaround. But other than that, the tools are the same, the process is the same, and in fact I do this a lot in Final Cut Pro as well. Also interested in Canon R5C limited to C-Log 2, which seems more difficult. I'm not sure what you're asking there. The R5C, I don't think the R5C even has C-Log 2, does it? I thought it's C-Log 3 limited to C-Log 2, which seems more difficult. I'm not sure what you mean there, Adrian. The gamma that you're shooting on with your camera doesn't make any difference to this. This is because you're moving it from that gamma, which, as I said, is anyone's guess. Each manufacturer is doing something different, and you're moving it to a common standard. So it doesn't make any difference. R5C has C-Log 2, but it does not have C-Log 3. I thought it was the other way around, but again, regardless, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, you could be shooting in like wide DR, which isn't log, but it's also not Rec 7 and 9, and this will work. You could be shooting in any gamma profile on any camera. How do you change log to 7 and 9 in Premiere Pro? You would use the Lumetri's basic functions, where I think it's the very top option under basic is to import a LUT. The most recent version of Premiere, I think there's some more advanced color management stuff, but I'm afraid I don't use Premiere and haven't used it for years because it drives me absolutely insane. Apologies. But you can definitely apply a LUT in the Lumetri panel, Kevin. Color matched in DaVinci by selecting the card. Does this differ from your? Yeah, sorry, I haven't done it. I did a long time ago. There's a video up on YouTube with me pretty much delivering exactly the same content, but at the end, I address the whole color match thing in Resolve. The classic legacy color match seems to work okay-ish. The video one doesn't. Or certainly didn't. I haven't checked it for a little while. I got a little bit bored of checking it every single time a new version came out. So I haven't checked it in 21, but it never lined up. And there is a video on YouTube where I demonstrate that it doesn't line up. Once you know what I showed you with the vector scope and where things should fall and what those boxes are for, you then have all the knowledge you need to check and see for yourself that when you use the color match function with the ColorChecker video, they don't end up in those boxes. I don't know why. I would love it to not be the case. It historically has been a big problem because a lot of people have just assumed they've taken it on faith that it's working. Once you know what you're looking for in the vector scope, you can actually see for yourself they don't line up. So it's not actually, whatever it's doing, it's not doing it correctly. And it's not aligning it to the correct standards in the image. So yeah. I basically short story there, Alexander, is don't use the color match function. Do what I showed you. It takes a little bit longer, but it's 100% correct every single time.
And it's also transferable to other software as well, the workflow you've been showing, Ollie.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, it's completely transferable in amongst other software. Good point, Andre.
Good. So I think that was the last question that we had. So thank you so much, Ollie. Thanks for all the questions. Hope everybody enjoyed the webinar. As mentioned before, we started a new promotion in Selector ColorChecker video charts, including the ones Ollie has been showing. So these are available on the Calibrite and official Calibrite website, as well as from Calibrite resellers in your region. So please check them out. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Ollie. So it's been a pleasure. So thanks everybody, and have a good rest of the
Go watch
day
the
and
football.
evening. Yeah.
I hope we're winning.
I haven't checked, but let's see. Okay, let's keep it secret for now.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.